500 Assyrian archers against 20,000 defenders. Impossible odds, yet the Assyrians did not lose a single man. Under the scorching sun of 701 BCE, a silent army of bowmen marched toward the fortified Judean city of Lachish. Their faces wrapped in linen, their bows taller than a man, their arrows tipped with bronze that glimmered like death. But behind the numbers lies a darker truth. What secret tactic did the Assyrians unleash that made resistance meaningless? What mistake doomed one of Judah's greatest strongholds? And why did the king try to erase the real story from history's tablets? This is not just a siege, it is a masterclass in psychological warfare, engineering brilliance, and the terrifying precision of 500 elite archers. The first rays of dawn crawled over the hills of Judah, revealing a land holding its breath. Lachish, proud, defiant, and carved into the very stone of Judean identity, stood like a lone guardian between its kingdom and an empire that swallowed nations whole. The air itself felt heavier, as if it knew an unstoppable force was marching toward it. In Jerusalem, King Hezekiah wrestled with doubt and desperation, but here, in Lachish, the soldiers felt the pressure most acutely. They tightened their leather straps, scanned the horizon, and whispered prayers that tasted of fear. For weeks they had heard rumors. The Assyrians had crushed Sidon, Ashkelon, Ekron, cities stronger than theirs. And now, the black-winged banners of Sennacherib moved ever closer, carried by an army so disciplined it seemed less like men and more like a machine. The ground began trembling before anyone saw the first Assyrian spear. One scout after another returned, pale-faced, struggling to describe what approached. Siege towers, larger than houses. Rams plated with iron, thousands of infantry moving in perfect rhythm. And at the heart of this juggernaut, a quiet, unnerving formation. 500 archers, each bow taller than a child, each step perfectly timed, each expression unreadable behind linen veils. Lachish's defenders looked upon this army and felt the cold grip of inevitability. For all their courage, they knew they were facing something unprecedented, an empire that had mastered not only weapons, but fear itself. Still, they stood their ground, gripping shields slick with morning dew, hoping that faith and stone walls might hold back the tide. Yet, as the dust rose and the Assyrian shadow spread across the fields, one truth echoed through the hearts of every Judean inside Lachish. The real battle would not be fought on the walls, but in the mind. Night fell over Lachish like a shroud, yet no one slept. Inside the stone walls, fear moved silently from house to house, threading itself into conversations, breaths, prayers. Soldiers gathered near torchlit corridors, their shadows trembling on the mud-brick walls as if even the flames were afraid. Every sound, the creak of a gate hinge, the distant howl of wind felt like an omen. Mothers soothed restless children, promising safety they no longer believed in. Merchants, once loud and confident, now spoke only in whispers. And the commanders, they wore expressions carved from stone, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They were running out of time. The drums from the Assyrian camp began at dusk, low, rhythmic, unnervingly steady. With each beat, hearts tightened. Scouts reported that the enemy's camp stretched across the valley like a second city, glowing with thousands of fires. But the detail that troubled everyone most was not the numbers, it was the precision. The Assyrians moved like extensions of one mind. No shouting, no disorder, only absolute discipline. Rumors swirled through the courtyards and barracks. They fire so fast you can't raise your shield. They never miss. They don't take prisoners. The name of the 500 elite archers spread like a chill through the streets. Men trained to control the battlefield, not merely kill. Their presence created an invisible pressure, a psychological siege long before a single arrow was loosed. Commanders debated frantically attempt to break out, reinforce the walls, or wait for a miracle from Jerusalem. Each choice carried the weight of doom. The people of Lachish clung to hope, but even hope felt brittle in their hands. Then, one night, as torches flickered along the ramparts, a new sound drifted across the darkness, an Assyrian horn, deep and mournful. It was the sound of inevitability drawing closer. Morning lights spilled across the valley, revealing the brutal truth of Lachish's fate. Where once there had been rolling fields and terraces of olive groves, there now stood the iron anatomy of an empire preparing to strike. The Assyrians had arrived not merely as an army, but as a civilization of war. From the battlements, Judean defenders watched in stunned silence. The Assyrians worked without hurry, without noise, without visible emotion. Engineers drove stakes into the ground, marking a perfect geometric grid. Carpenters followed, hammering in relentless rhythm. Siege towers rose like skeletal beasts, timber frames covered in rawhide, armored fronts gleaming under the sun. Stone throwers were assembled with mechanical precision. Every component of the war machine slid into place, as if rehearsed 1,000 times. But the most unsettling sight was not the engines, it was the formation of 500 archers at the center of the camp. They moved as one, adjusting quivers, testing bowstrings made of twisted sinew, their long composite bows curved like the horns of the gods. No shouts, no bragging, only discipline so complete it felt inhuman. Their commander signaled with a single gesture, and the entire unit shifted formation like a flock of ravens turning in midair. They practiced firing arcs, volleys, suppression patterns, each arrow released in perfect unity. The sound was not the chaotic snap of individual bows, but a synchronized thrum that rolled across the valley like distant thunder. Meanwhile, Judean officers scrambled to reinforce the weakest section of the wall. Lachish's sloped ramparts were strong, but the Assyrians had identified a fatal flaw, a shallow incline on the southwest corner, ideal for building an assault ramp. The defenders had ignored it for years. Now it was their death sentence. As the Assyrians began piling earth and stones, constructing a ramp with terrifying speed, the Judeans felt their strength draining away. This was not improvisation. This was a script the Assyrians had written long before arriving. And when the largest siege tower unfurled its crimson banner, catching the wind like a vulture's wing, every man on the wall knew the engines of war were almost ready, and Lachish's clock had begun to run out. It happened in a single heartbeat, so fast that even the veterans on the walls were unsure whether it was a mistake or destiny unfolding. The sun had barely climbed above the Assyrian camp when a Judean patrol attempted a sudden sortie, hoping to disrupt the construction of the siege ramp. Perhaps it was desperation, perhaps it was courage, perhaps it was a commander trying to prove that Lachish still had fire left. But the moment the gates cracked open, the Assyrians reacted with terrifying precision. A signal flag rose. A horn sounded once, and the 500 archers pivoted as if pulled by a single string. What followed was not an attack, it was a demonstration. Arrows flew in perfectly spaced intervals, not to kill but to shape the battlefield. Judean soldiers found their paths blocked, their escape routes cut off, their commanders pinned behind shields. It was as though the archers were drawing invisible lines across the earth, saying, "You may move here, but no farther." The sortie collapsed within moments. Not a single Assyrian engaged in melee, none needed to. The archers controlled everything. From the walls, Lachish's defenders watched in dawning horror. The Assyrians were not improvising. This was not a reaction. It was a tactic so rehearsed that even chaos bowed to it. And then came the final shift, the moment that shattered Judean morale. Sennacherib himself rode forward, his chariot glinting in the morning sun. He surveyed the failed sortie and gave a simple command. The engineers immediately accelerated the ramp's construction. The siege tower began rolling toward the vulnerable corner. A mistake by the defenders, a decision by an emperor, a synchronization of perfect military engineering. Everything aligned in a single moment, and the fate of Lachish tilted. The city had passed the point of no return, and the defenders felt it like a cold wind across their backs. The first arrow did not whistle. It growled, a deep, vibrating hum that rolled across the battlefield like the breath of some ancient beast. Then came another and another, until the sky itself seemed to tremble under a storm of iron. From the walls of Lachish, defenders watched in horror as thousands of Assyrian troops advanced behind a living curtain of arrows. The 500 elite archers stood in perfect formation, their feet planted in the dusty earth, their movements synchronized like gears inside a great machine. Each bowstring snapped with the same rhythm, each volley arced with the same deadly grace. They were not firing to kill, they were firing to control. Every time a Judean soldier tried to mount the battlements, a volley greeted him, not aimed at his heart, but at his shield, his footing, his ability to stand. The archers were carving open the battlefield, suppressing every movement, choking every attempt to resist. Behind them, the siege engines thundered forward. Great wooden towers, armored in hides soaked with oil, rolled across the newly built ramp. Their wheels crushed earth and stone with slow, inevitable force. Slingers perched atop them hurled stones the size of skulls at the walls, sending chips of limestone raining down like white ash. The engineers beneath the towers worked calmly, protected by the constant rain of precision fire. Arrows pinned Judean defenders behind merlons, blinded their lookouts, forced them into cover exactly where the Assyrians wanted them. Step by step, the siege machines approached the battlements. The noise grew deafening, the grinding wheels, the snapping bowstrings, the dull thuds of arrows embedding in wood and stone. Still, Lachish fought. A handful of Judean warriors attempted a desperate counterattack, rushing to set fire to the ramp. But before they were even halfway across the wall walk, the archers shifted angle, unleashing a diagonal volley so dense that the air itself seemed to harden. The defenders faltered. The largest siege tower reached the top of the ramp. Its iron-shod gate slammed into the battlements with a crash that echoed across the valley. The final phase of the siege had begun, and Lachish was running out of sky to breathe beneath the rain of iron. The walls of Lachish shuddered as the siege tower locked into place with a thundering impact that felt like the fist of a titan striking the earth. For a heartbeat, everything went still, the defenders frozen, the Assyrians poised, the air itself holding its breath. Then the 500 archers moved, not forward, not upward, but sideways, splitting into two perfect wings that fanned out along the ramp's base. With a single command, their bows rose in unison. And what followed was unlike any volley Lachish had yet faced. It was not a rain, it was a pulse. A rotating barrage, rows firing, rows stepping back, rows stepping forward, creating a continuous stream of arrows so unbroken that it became a wall of sound and motion, a living barrier of iron. The Judeans could not even lift their heads to aim. The very act of standing meant being pinned, suppressed, blinded by the storm. Within the city, panic rippled through the ranks. Commanders tried shouting orders, but their voices dissolved beneath the relentless rhythm. Messengers attempted to run between sections of the wall, only to drop behind shields moments later as volleys sliced the air above them. The defenders were no longer a unified force. They were isolated fragments, cut off by a system of perfect coordination. Then, amid the chaos, the final blow fell. The siege tower's front hatch slammed down, forming a bridge of iron onto the battlements. Assyrian infantry surged forward, not chaotically, but in measured, disciplined lines. Their advance was shielded on both sides by the rotating archers, who adjusted their angles to carve lanes of safety for their comrades. Defenders tried to regroup along the inner wall, but each pocket of resistance was immediately smothered under calculated arcs of suppressive fire. Every attempt to rally died in the cradle. Dust choked the air. Stone fragments littered the walkways. The sun dimmed behind a haze of smoke and fear. By midday, the defenders no longer fought to win. They fought simply to survive the next breath. And as the Assyrian foothold expanded across the battlements, one truth became undeniable. Lachish was no longer defending its walls. It was losing them piece by piece, breath by breath, hope by hope. When the final pockets of resistance crumbled, a strange quiet settled over Lachish, a silence so heavy it felt like the city itself was exhaling its last breath. Smoke drifted in soft grey ribbons above the rooftops, rising from shattered homes and breached walls. What had begun as a fortress of pride and defiance was now a monument to inevitability. The Assyrian soldiers moved through the streets not with frenzy, but with practiced efficiency. Their discipline remained unbroken, even in victory. Officers recorded positions, catalogued supplies, and marked strategic points. Scribes followed behind them, etching notes for the king's official account. Everything was measured, controlled, methodical, just as the entire campaign had been. And then there were the 500 archers, the silent architects of Lachish's downfall. They stood apart, their veiled faces unreadable as they inspected their bows and gathered their arrows from the streets. Not a single one limped, not a single one bore wounds. Their unit was still intact, an untouched blade that had cut through an entire city without ever needing to clash hand to hand. For the Judeans, the aftermath was a wound far deeper than stone and mortar. Families were led away in lines that stretched across the valley. The cries of the displaced mixed with the rumble of Assyrian chariots heading toward Jerusalem. And in the heart of the devastation, the psychological weight settled. Lachish, the shield of Judah, had fallen. Its defeat signaled the collapse of hope. Sennacherib ordered artists to carve the siege into stone, every tower, every ramp, every figure, captured in meticulous detail. Lachish would not merely be conquered, it would be immortalized. A victory of empire, a tragedy of a people. A warning carved in ash. Centuries later, when the dust of empires settled and the names of kings faded into forgotten scrolls, Lachish remained its story etched not only in ruins, but in memory. The stones that once bore the weight of desperate defenders now lay scattered across the hillside, silent witnesses to a lesson carved into history itself. What happened here was more than the fall of a city. It was the unveiling of a truth that still echoes across millennia. Power is not always measured in numbers, but in precision, discipline, and the ability to shape fear. Archaeologists would one day uncover Sennacherib's reliefs, vast stone panels depicting the siege in chilling detail. They showed the ramp, the tower, the engineers, the captives. And there, almost hidden among the scenes, stood the archers. Calm, focused, unbroken. Their presence confirmed what the survivors whispered, that 500 men had changed the fate of thousands without ever losing formation. Yet the deeper echo was philosophical. Lachish revealed the evolution of ancient warfare, the shift from brute force to psychological mastery, from chaos to choreography, from battlefields decided by strength to battlefields decided by systems. And as scholars traced the lines carved by Assyrian artists more than 2,700 years ago, they realized something profound. The story of Lachish was not merely a chronicle of conquest. It was a warning whispered through stone, a reminder that empires rise on precision as much as power. That fear can be a weapon as sharp as iron, and that even the mightiest walls can fall when the mind behind them begins to crack. The echoes of Lachish still linger, quiet, solemn, unforgettable,